Hello, hello, hello. That's the last day of 2022, that is, the 31st day. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's the 30th. That's right, tomorrow's the 31st. Got ahead of the gun here, so to speak. Wanted to continue the reading of Redemption Manual 4.5. Had some hiccups today with the internet for some reason. So I hope that you enjoyed this and will take notes. Um, this is how you get out of the system, folks. There are so many people out there who are, you know, in fear porn or whatever you want to call it, talking about all the bad things. And there are many bad things going on. But the whole deal is to see that and then begin to what I would call move into what I call the remedy to get yourself out of that situation. You see, and this is what this is all about. That's why it's called a redemption manual. Is to redeem yourself. That you put yourself in a redemption mode instead of actually being dependent upon the federal government or any government per situation. So what we're going to start with is, as today I did the first national bank, so I'm going to talk about the second national bank. Again, this is all history. Unless you understand history, you can never really actually understand the situation today. So you have to know that. And if you don't know that, you're not grounded, you see. So here we go. This is the Second National Bank. In January 9th, 1832, the Second National Bank applied for a charter renewal 4 years earlier. This time, President Andrew Jackson vetoed the bank to be chartered on the grounds that the bank was unconstitutional, and he successfully paid off the national debt the first time and the only time, folks. The only time ever. He's paid off the national debt, leading the U.S. with a surplus of $5,000. That was in 1832. He said if Congress has the right under the Constitution to issue paper money, it was given them to use themselves, not to be delegated to individuals or corporations. So when you see what is happening today, the Federal Reserve is not a federal government office. Get that in your head. Understand that. They chose that name to fool you, you see. And I'm a little upset because people do not recognize that. They think that the Fed is actually the government, and it's not. They fooled you. You think they're stupid or something, folks? They're playing chess with us as we are playing checkers. I'm not angry, I'm just trying to get your attention to understand that you need to understand history. If you don't understand history, you can never solve the problem today. Period. And this is why people, don't have any answers because they don't search history. They're not willing to do that. They want an easy answer. It doesn't work that way, folks. It never will. It never will. That's why we have people out here, the characters out here, who are looking for a savior. You are the savior yourself. You are the authority of your life. No one else does things to you unless you allow them to do. Understand? So on January the 30th, 1835, Andrew Jackson attended a congressional funeral in the Capitol building. As he exited, Richard Lawrence, an unemployed house painter, pointed a pistol at Jackson and fired. The percussion cap exploded, but the bullet did not discharge. The enraged Jackson raised his cane to strike his attacker, who fired again. The second weapon also misfired, and the 67-year-old president escaped assassination at close range. Jackson was convinced that Lawrence was hired by his political enemies, probably the Whig Party, to stop his plan to destroy the Bank of the United States. Andrew Jackson violated public international law because he denied the creditors his just lien or settlement rights or from the debtor. However, the bankers did not lend value substance, that is substance, so in actuality, they had an imperfect lien. Therefore, the law actually did not apply. So-called each and every people under martial rule ever since the national emergency, defined by I'm sorry, I've got a little contacts out here. Let's see, this is 127, and this is 129. One page is missing here. I'm sorry about that, but we'll continue on. This is now speaking of President Lincoln. Thus, the so-called Constitution for the United States of America has subsequently and temporarily ceased being the acknowledged law of the land in many courts. The assumed title of President, the assumed title of Congress, and the assumed jurisdiction of the courts thereof have unlawfully presumed that they were free to remake the Union in a new image under the so-called law of necessity, whereas lawfully no such constitutional provisions were or are in place which afforded power to any of the actions which were taken, which presumed to place the Union under the new form of control or designation as a democracy. I have a book here. I have read pretty much all of it. And what I want to show you this is a book. It was done probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer. People have no idea that when the failed revolutions that tried to take place in Europe, many of them escaped to Switzerland and eventually came to the United States. And what they did was come here to actually create also a nimbus for people here. So you need to understand that simply is that this is why things begin to change, because what happened was the government allowed them, that is Lincoln's government, but others before him allowed these conspirators to come into our government to try to overthrow it. And Lincoln had many of these people who were Marxists come in and help him to run for office, to get him in office. Very few people know this, folks. You got to figure this out, because if you don't, you have what I call empty spaces that doesn't make any sense. This is why this Redemption 4.5 is all about. So the so-called president, that is Mr. Abraham Lincoln, apparently knew that his executive orders no longer had any force under contractual constitutional law. So he commissioned General Orders Number 100, that is based upon April 20th, 1863, apparently as a special code to govern his actions under martial law. Are you aware that Abraham Lincoln was involved in the state of Maryland, and those who were actually involved because he was afraid that Maryland would actually become a Confederate state? Are you aware of that? That he actually threw all the legislative body of people into jail? Are you aware of that? No, you're not. You don't even know history. You see, you're not aware of these things. Why would Lincoln do that? You see, Lincoln has a spotty record, folks. He was a lawyer himself. He was a lawyer who helped the railroads out immensely. And I've shared this with others. And he would always side and work for those railroads, so he benefited. He had major friends that were helping him out to get in office, you see. This further extended the laws of the District of Columbia and also fictionally implemented and provisions of Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 17 and 18 of the defunct contract known as the Constitution, beyond the boundaries of Washington, D.C., and the illegitimacy into the several states no longer united under the central agency government of the United States. So General Orders Number 100, also called the Lieber Instructionals and the Lieber Code, have apparently extended the law of war and private international law into so-called several states of the Union. The defunct agency, that is the U.S. government, assumed power and became the presumed military conqueror of all the people in which it could bend its will by misrepresentation over the land of the former several states of the Union. Are you aware of this? Do you even know this? Does your teacher in school teach you this? No, of course not. Martial rule has apparently been kept secret and has never really ended. Lincoln was assassinated before he could complete the implementation of his plan to constitutionally and not militarily reform the Southern agency governments and restore the United States and Congress assembled. Ever since the so-called social compact known as the United States of America has been ruled under military law under the assumed and illegitimate commander-in-chief, the president and his assumed executive powers according to the policies of executive orders, a non-existent social compact be a military dictator type of functionality for the money kings and the crown of England under the law of necessity according to the principles of international public order. So what has happened here is that he chose to do this route. He chose to do this because the South walked out. The South left the whole meetings and left and said, we're not going to be a part of this. We're not going to pay for the debts. We're not going to be responsible for that. We're going to create our own country. Okay? But there are other leaders here in the South also wanting this to happen, you see. So the South was not apparently, quote unquote, doing a good thing, you see. A particular guy who was a Jew was actually involved in the Confederacy immensely. And if you understand a little bit about, I gotta come to me in a minute here. The guy who was actually involved with the Ku Klux Klan, eventually involved with that, and he's written a couple of books. And he was actually in Charleston, and it'll come to me, and I'll tell you more about him. But anyway, so what is transpiring? See, what he was hoping to do is get this thing dealt with, and then he was going to tweet it back and get the states back in, that is the southern states back in the Union. But he was murdered. He was killed. That was just, that was something. And I'm not saying he's all bad, because he tried to do some things. He, in a lot of ways, he was pushed in a corner, you see. And I'm not saying Lincoln's good or bad, but you need to understand what he did also, you see, that created this. He should have never been the president of the United States in the first place, you see, because there were 4 candidates that run for office, each one based upon a region of the country. And so people don't understand that neither. That's how they divide the vote, you see. So constitutional law on the original social compact for the several states of the Union is apparently enforced only as a matter of keeping the public peace under the provisions of General Orders Number 100, under martial law or rule. This peace is further evident in the preamble of the so-called Expatriation Act of 1868. Under martial law, title is a mere fiction, since all property belongs to the military except for that property which the commander-in-chief may, in his benevolence, exempt from taxation and seizure, and upon which he allows the enemy to reside. In proclaiming the first Trading with the Enemy Act by executive order, okay, so you got to understand this is the first executive order also. There was no executive orders by the president before this. None. He's the first president that does this. That's why it's number 100. The illegitimacy of called President Mr. Abraham Lincoln as an attorney set in place the means by which the federal new agency military government could interact with all walks of life who were not 14th Amendment citizens, that is, non-registered voters per the 15th Amendment, of the alter status of resident alien. Such people could technically be designated as enemies. Are you beginning to understand how people not a party to the regime of necessity could be at odds with their conditional attainment to such military agency as the government of necessity? In a message that is to Congress on December 3rd, 1861, Abraham Lincoln, that is another, like I said, was attorney, answered the banker's argument that the beneficiary people of the posterity could not be trusted with their constitutional powers. The political and monetary system of free enterprise conceived by their founding fathers by saying, no men living are more worthy to be trusted than those who toil up from poverty. Interesting statement. None less inclined to take or touch aught which they have not honestly earned. Let them beware of surrendering a political power which they already possess, and which, if surrendered, will surely be used to close the door of advancement against such as they, and to fix new disabilities and burdens upon them, till all the liberties shall be lost. In 1865, just before the close of the Civil War, the military dictator, that is the illegitimacy known as the president, Mr. Abraham Lincoln declared his new monetary policy. The government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credits needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers. By the adoption of these principles, the taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest. Money will cease to be master and become the servant of humanity. The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme predicate of government, but is the government's greatest opportunity. Had this been implemented, it would have ushered in a worldwide economic renewal. Unfortunately, a few weeks after his introduction by Mr. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated because he defied the bankers in proposing to print interest-free money to pay the war debt. Thus, the government continued to operate fully under the authority of private international law dictated by the creditors. Since the commander, you got to see what's going on here. It's the bankers that are actually wanting to have control of this country. You see? And anyone who even changes his story here, as Abraham Lincoln tried, they were going to eliminate him. They were not going to let him get away with it. So since the commander-in-chief, Mr. Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated before he could complete plans for reinstating constitutional agency government in southern states of the Union and end the martial rule by executive order, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution had further created a new citizenship of status for their expanded jurisdictions. Laws for the District of Columbia were proposed and passed by the Military Agency Congress in 1871. The District of Columbia being incorporated as a private foreign corporation by the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871. Look it up. And all member states of the Union were apparently reformed as franchisees or political subdivisions. See Dyer, that is D-Y-E-T-T, versus Turner, year of 1968, 439 Pacific Reporters, second series, 266, 267, and Utah versus Phillips, that is in 1975, 540 Pacific Reporter, second series, 936, 941-942 of the corporation known as the United States in all caps. Hence, creating a new military social construct, formerly known as the Social Compact of the several states of the Union, what remained of the former agency government of the Republican form of the Social Compact was the private side under the rule of the bankers solely for their absolute express benefit. The first attempt by the military Congress under the new military social contract or construct to define citizenship was in 1866 in the passage of the Civil Rights Act, which was revised statutes section 1992, 8 United States Code annotated section 1. The act provides that saying all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power are declared to be citizens of the United States. And in this, in turn, was followed in 1868 by the adoption of the 14th Amendment, the United States Code, annotated said article of amendments, the 14th Amendment declaring all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. At this period of time, the only people in the United States who were under the jurisdiction of the private bifurcated government of the assumed 10 miles square of Washington, D.C., were the government employees, those within the territory owned by the United States, and now the former slaves. The former citizens of the several southern states of the Union now captured became 14th Amendment United States citizens. The only remainder of people operating within the military social construct or the alleged creditors who could still invoke the power over agency government through the original jurisdiction of the Republican form of government as established by the Social Compact of the United States Constitution as the holder in due course of each and every private right, privilege, and immunity, if the need became necessary, concerning any possible attempt by the new military social construct to act arbitrarily in any way concerning the servicing of the alleged debt due. A new 13th Amendment, after the elimination of the missing 13th Amendment, which dealt with what we call lawyers or attorneys was swept under the rug and was never talked about from then on. So the 13th Amendment was enacted in December 18, 1865. The 14th Amendment was enacted July 28, 1868. It's amazing how quick this happens. And I have a book here at the house here that basically states that these amendments were, the 14th Amendment was never enacted. It's never passed by the states, period. These people, gentlemen actually who helped write this book here, Al Vincent Jr. wrote that book, okay? Not this book, but another book. It's called The Missing, not The Missing, but actually dealing with the 14th and 16th Amendment. So here it goes. He says this right here. Both amendments were illicitly ratified by non-elected representatives and senators under martial law in each and every military enforced southern state legislation. Are you aware of that? You hear that? It was not constitutional. Because there were people who were running for office that were not running for office, but there were people in office because it was still under martial law. Still under martial law. So under the martial law in each and every military enforced southern state legislature put into place by the U.S. military by direct order of the commander-in-chief. It doesn't say, here you have to understand, the commander-in-chief, it doesn't say president here anymore. It says commander-in-chief. And every president ever since after Lincoln has done this has always emphasized the commander-in-chief part. Okay? Which tells you we're still under martial law. Through force over the conquered territory and under martial law. No such state could ever attain its freedom from the new federal social military rule by ratifying these new amendments as misrepresented to the people by the federal system. They were told that the troops of aggression would be removed from such territories and cessation of hostilities would occur once these amendments were ratified. In other words, unless you pass these things, the military is going to still stay here in the grounds of South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, whatever state that actually was part of the Confederacy, was being threatened. And if you didn't go along with it, it would be continued military rule. Okay? Any contract entered under threat, duress, or coercion is null and void. So that means simply the pressure that was put on these congressmen at that time are under pressure. They're told basically you either do this or else. We're going to do something else if you don't go along with it. So it's not what you call a very hospitable way of actually passing an amendment, okay? Any contract entered under threat, I just said that, sorry, according to the rule of war, that is martial law, once martial law is lifted, all laws, rules, regulations created or promulgated during the hostilities are null and void. The parties return to status quo before such hostilities broke out between the parties. But then the Constitution was not even in effect following Sine, S-I-N-E, die, and the proclamation of martial law. It's apparent that due to the fact that the national emergency, which always national emergencies always are there to take something, folks, always. President Roosevelt did that immensely. Okay? Has never been lifted or proclaimed to be over, that the so-called military social construct known as the United States is still in power under the rules of martial law by and through the executive orders of the commander-in-chief, cause of necessity by Sine. The 14th Amendment brought the free slaves, whose previous owners were private plantation owners, landowners, transfer those slaves under subjection of the new military social construct government, the assumed 10-mile square jurisdiction of the city of Washington or for District of Columbia. And it offered to its protection to those who would choose to become its subjects. Interesting, subjects. In exchange for their freedom and / or sovereignty. The 14th Amendment is a good example of the give a little, take a lot strategy that is often used, a sugar-coated to a bitter pill. Sovereign people who have assumed themselves to be among the powers of earth have created a social compact, that is a government, to guarantee themselves their rights. They secure these rights under the social compact as birthrights from their posterity, that is the citizens, with a capital C. In contrast, the federal government created 14th Amendment citizenship, the low C, to guarantee its power over the former citizens, capital C, by reducing them to the standing of a newly created small c citizen. It seems to be taking citizens under its protection, but at the price of servitude. Sovereigns may choose to become subjects, free men and women to become vassals. This amendment has always been controversial. Many people over the years have questioned the amount of power it vests in the federal government. Some have even questioned its validity. On the one occasion, Judge Elliott of the Utah Supreme Court, as above reference remarked, I cannot believe, this is Judge Elliott, I cannot believe that any court in full possession of its faculties could honestly hold that the amendment was properly approved and adopted. And that's based upon State versus Phillips Pacific Reporter, second series, volume 540, pages 941, 942, 1975. So this took place in 1975. There are still people actually saying, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. Something's wrong. However, the most important fact about this amendment is that although it created a new class of citizen, it did not have any effect on sovereign people. Both classes still exist. When the Constitution was adopted, the people of the United States were the citizens with a capital C of the several states for whom and for whose posterity the governor was established. Each of them were capital C citizens by birthright in the state of birth to which the United States was created to protect from foreign powers as the adoption of the Constitution by several states of the Union and to make uniform such protection among the states. And all free people thereafter born within one of the several states became by birth citizens, capital C, of the compact party state of the United States of America. But we know that this is not true from research in the law of contract. Anyone not signatory to the social compact or directly related as the posterity thereof, thereto I should say, is an alien to the compact and is only allowed to assume whatever right out of necessity to the compact to keep the peace until all power is vested in order to secure to the members such blessings unto themselves or their posterity as are necessary or opportunistic as the need may arise from time to time to preserve their freedom. Both classes of citizens, that is the capital C / small c citizens, no longer exist except by the need of necessity, as may or may not be claimed by any particular member of the current military social construct. It's your right of expatriation and repatriation to emerge into a social compact to which you become signature to become a sovereign people, while it is privileged to be a 14th Amendment citizen, and more importantly, this is what I'm referring to, what I call the revolving door. Okay, when you were talking about revolving door, it used to be you go in and go back out. So you work, this is what you're saying here, you have the right to expatriate, and with that, doing that, you also can repatriate to emerge into a social compact to which you became a signature to become a sovereign people. Just remember that you paid for a privilege, whereas a right carries no obligation. This is at the heart of your public Declaration of Independence to a candid world by and through such social compact created to recognize your sovereign birthright, to assume among the powers of earth, recognized by the laws of nature and nature's created to which you are entitled to emerge into a sovereign people. You were created to be and which are recognized and protected within the universe and / or international public order. The next section I'm talking about here is two governments, two flags. The corporate state. Once the smoke settled after the Civil War, European international bankers arrived in town. In 1871, the default again loomed and bankruptcy was imminent. So in 1872, the 10-mile square district of Columbia was incorporated in England. A loophole was discovered in the Constitution by cunning attorneys in league with the international bankers. They realized that the separate nation by the same name existed that Congress had created in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. This is what it's saying. The Congress shall have power to exercise inclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, not exceeding 10 square miles as may, by secession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings, and to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or any department or officer thereof. This United States is a military legislation democracy within the former constitutional republic government and is known as the Federal United States. It has exclusive, unlimited rule over its subjects, whether or not such military allowed one to call oneself a citizen or not. In the eyes of the military construct, such people are solely resident aliens, and all others are non-resident aliens of the District of Columbia. The territories and enclaves, such as Guam, Midway Island, Wake Island, and Puerto Rico, etc. Anyone who is a citizen by way of the 14th Amendment, that is a naturalized citizen, has only one sole privilege in the military construct, and that is the right to vote, period. So in other words, you're given the opportunity to vote. But you can rescind that by unregistering yourself at your county. This is what I'm telling you about what I've done. You can tell them, I don't want to vote anymore. I want that rescinded. I don't vote anymore. I do not consent to what's going on. Because what you're saying, what you're doing with that is saying this, excuse me, as I was saying, I see the clarity of this, and I don't want to participate in this mural of this whole idea that I'm sometime a citizen of this and I'm I have to pay taxes and everything. The only privilege that I supposedly get is to vote. And when reality simply is that both parties are actually controlled by the bankers. In fact, they control all the other parties too, folks. Not, the small parties, the third political parties, they control them all. Both United States formally existed side by side in the same United States and Congress, a symbol that rules in both the former social compact and the military construct. One United States, the Republican form of government of 50 several states of the Union, has the stars and stripes as its flag, but without a fringe on it. Okay? When you go by people's houses, you'll never see a fringe, usually with a flag in someone's yard. But if you go into a courtroom, there is a fringe on it. That's the yellow fringe that goes along the side of it. That's to tell you that you're entering a military court. You see, you're no longer, that flag is giving you a glimpse, a hint of what's going on, period. The abbreviations of the states of the continental United States are with or without the zip codes. So you're given Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, continue on, etc. The abbreviation of the states under the jurisdiction of the federal United States after the Civil War, legislative democracies are, like Alabama is now AL, capital, they're all in caps, P. AL, Alaska, AK, Arizona, AZ, Arkansas, AR, California, CA. Okay, you see that? So when you do address a letter to someone, I do this. I write the city that I live in, and I write the name out. So I live in South Carolina. So I don't write this SC there, folks, or S.C. I write the whole name out, South Carolina, on there. And I do not put a zip code there. Okay? That also changed in the Wilson administration. Okay? After the Civil War, even the designated abbreviation of District of Columbia changed from District, D-I-S-T-R, of Columbia, that is C-O-L, to D.C. So they're giving you little hints here if you pay attention. But most people at that time didn't know, and it's rightfully so. They don't understand what's going on. To inform those who might be awake concerning the changing of the guard over the old social compact to the new military compact. The international bankers and the military Congress conjured up this bit of mischief and passed it into law. But whose law? Congress with the we the people and their posterity. Long before the incorporation of 1871, Congress sold them out when they finished a newly formed military private corporation and made it the government of District of Columbia. They used the non-existent so-called Constitution on the military dictatorship to declare such powers through the 14th Amendment, as their bylaws therefore taking their authority not under the Constitution, but taking their authority over the Constitution. They copyright not only the Constitution, but also any and all related names such as the United States, that is in all caps, U.S., all caps, U.S.U., all caps, the United States of America, all caps, and USA, all caps, as their own. So these are symbols of what they've done. And if you're alert, you see something's wrong. Okay? This is the final blow to the original Constitution, and it related to the posterity of the signatures of the social compact known as the United States for the United States of America. That is not in all caps. Henceforth, the United States, all caps, and the United States of America, all caps, has been governed entirely by a private corporate law dictated by the bankers as the physical agents for the creditors. So they have, and you have the same thing. You'll get a bill in the mail here in the United States. You'll notice it's in all caps. And you'll have your driver's license, and it's all in all caps. You'll have a passport, it's in all caps. So it's over and over. And that bill actually is supposed to, if you understand it correctly, it's a trinity, you see. And the right way it would be under the Jural law would be this simply is that the state itself is the trustees. And that you, the other part of the trinity, you are the beneficiary of that trust, and you are also the executor or executor of that trust. And what they've done, they completely turned it upside down, and they basically say the state is the quote unquote beneficiary, and then also the lawyers are the, just my mind with a slip here. This is de facto law. This is not de jure. And everybody sees that word fact in there thinking it has to do with factual. See, that's another way how they trick you, you see. And so they're the beneficiary and they're the executor of the trust. And you are the trustee. So this is the reason why you have to pay bills or taxes due to them. You'll notice, look at your, when you get a tax bill on your property or anything, it's all in all caps too. So we continue on here, see where I was at here. The act to provide a government for the District of Columbia, Section 34 of the 41st Congress of the United States, Section 3, Chapter 61 and 62, enacted February 21st to 1871, states that the United States of America, all caps, is a corporation whose jurisdiction is applicable only in the 10-mile square parcel of land known as the District of Columbia, as to whatever properties are legally titled to the United States by its registration in the corporate, county, state, and federal governments that are under military power of the United States, all caps, and its creditors. Let me get a little breath here. You've been manipulated. You've been lied to, folks, in every category. And their only jurisdiction is actually the 10-mile square period parcel of land known as the District of Columbia. It doesn't mean to have the realm of the whole United States. It's just in that particular 10-mile realm. Same way as the City of London. And I think it's a 2-mile square, but don't hold me to that. Maybe it's 1 mile, where the financial dealings take place for the whole world. It's considered the banking center of the world. And the Vatican is the same way. So these are all three of these places are what they call city-states. And they've been operating like this, and people are unaware of this. So you basically you volunteer to become a citizen of the corporation. You're unaware of what's happening. They didn't explain these things to you. Didn't tell you the directions or whatever. If you wanted to be this or that, they basically deceived you. Let's continue on. Under this provision, the Military Congress of the United States, all caps, had attained the power to pass private international law for applications within the Federal District of Columbia. All the states of the Union adopted under military order created new legislative conditions and codified their laws by copyright under federal mandate. State codes were unlawfully adopted, despite their origins as instruments of a sovereign people. However, we, the people, remain sovereign within the framework of international public order if we choose to emerge out of such military social contract by creating a new social compact according to the principles of universal and or international law to replace that which by sine, I say that wrong, sine, N-I-N-E-D-I-E, Latin, no longer exists for our benefit or that of our posterity. The private military copyright, the United States Code, all caps, Title 28, 3002, brackets 15, brackets A, basically reiterates that the United States, all caps, is a corporation. What was not said in 1871, but was implicit, was what is plainly stated at Title 28, 3002, parentheses 15, and parentheses 3, that all departments of the United States Corporation, all caps, are part of the corporation. Title 28, United States Code, all caps, is copyrighted per private international law. Indeed, the United States Code, all caps, it is copyright private international law and applicable only in the District of Columbia. This incorporation was first reported by Gary W. Phillips, whose career with the Immigration and Naturalized Service began in 1956. He was the INS director at SeaTac Airport for 20 years and began challenging the income tax in 1985, stated the Idaho Observer, March 2000. After nearly 40 years of government service, Phillips was forced to flee to his alleged country to protect his life after exposing the facts of the illegality of the federal government criminal income tax collection scam. Facts that are becoming well known among informed people throughout the so-called military social construct. Yeah, there is no law on the books that requires you to pay income tax. There isn't. Let's continue. Where did the Congress find the authority in the Constitution to reconstitute any part of the United States that is the capital, not a capital, but a lower U, United States capital? So what that means when you have a lower U and the states means simply the states are superior. Okay, by the capitalization of states, that is S-T-A-T-E-S, but only the first letter, and then with United is lowercase, meaning that the states itself is superior. You see, as a corporation. Quite simply, the 1791 Constitution was set aside to make room for the corporation under the law of necessity created by Fin-D. Would this act benefit the Republican form of government? Of course not. No. The private corporate bottom line is profit. You see that everywhere, folks. The municipal public bottom line is service to replace the former service-oriented form of government with a profit-oriented form of military government. Without any public knowledge or consent of the facts fostered upon the people, can only be described as treason. Treason, not only against the former social compact, but in respect to international law as well. This is clearly against the orderly peace and dignity of international public order. And you'll notice that, later on, we'll talk about it, but we're not there yet, but you'll notice that public order becomes public service? Is it public service? It's a different word. It's no longer public order. Okay, we'll talk about that. We'll get to it. We'll remember it. I'm getting ahead of the game here. A few superficial changes by attorneys were made to the original Constitution, and it was no longer the real thing. One thing I would recommend for you guys to do, get you a law dictionary and begin to look this up. Look it up, what attorney means. Look up the words in the Law Dictionary. You can get a Bouvier, Black's, 5th edition. They're usually around 40, 50 bucks if you can get them used. And then you can begin to learn some things. Okay. The Military Congress did not change the name of the document so that they could claim to be reading from the Constitution. They merely changed it from the Constitution for the United States of America to the Constitution of the United States of America. One word. It's been not one word, but I'm sorry, misread it here. These are all caps. So it's all Constitution of the United States, but the word of and of America, they changed the for, F-O-R, to of, O-F, and capitalized all the letters. All of a sudden we had two Constitutions, the original for show and the revision for actual use. The Act of 1871 provided the government for the District of Columbia creating a corporation entitled the United States of America, all caps, whose jurisdiction extends only over corporate entities created by municipal corporations and are operated over only in the District of Columbia, the city of Washington, as the District of Columbia is the capital District of Columbia, not the United States of America. And all laws passed within the District of Columbia are applicable and enforceable only in the District of Columbia and its possessions. This is what most people miss. Even I have made mistakes for that. So when they pass these certain laws, so to speak, it's only for the people that live there and the public servants, or what we call government workers. The states of Republican form of government are not possessions of the District of Columbia. Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam are possessions of the District of Columbia, as well as property legally titled to the United States, all caps, by states and counties. But the former Republican governor of the several states of the Union are under military dictatorship, operating under national mercy due to SINDIE, S-I-N-E-D-I-E. And what that means simply is that when they decided back in 1862, that the South, actually before the 1860, the South walked out. They no longer had states that was part of this, and so no longer was able to have a Republican form of government. You see, that's how it changed. And we haven't had one since then. You see, everything in 1871 changed the thing. Everything changed after the war between the states. So the United States Code, in all caps, in totality, was put together in the District of Columbia as copyright private international law and is applicable only in the District of Columbia and any other jurisdiction within the purview of the military dictatorship. By their own rules of jurisdiction, the United States, all caps, attorneys have no business prosecuting anyone outside the District of Columbia or federal territories. The military construct of federal district courts has no venue outside the District of Columbia and therefore has no jurisdiction outside the District of Columbia and its possessions. The military Congress cannot pass a law that is applicable in the several states of the Republic, then otherwise outside of the presumed emergency operating under the law of necessity created by Congressional SINDIE. If all the laws passed in the District of Columbia are private international law, including all the United States Code, is in all caps, and the statute of law and our revised statutes passed after 1871 and are applicable and enforceable only in the District of Columbia, then how can they become the law of the land? Because not knowing better, we the people allowed it. We have allowed agents of foreign countries and or enterprises to build a legal corporation that systematically corrupted every state, every county, and every city in the nation. And that's why you need to understand simply is that your city is a corporation, that your county is a corporation, that your school board is a corporation. They're all there. Now you'll go and hear the state of South Carolina. I've done a video of this probably a couple of years ago. When you go into a tiny town, there's a bank there, and this is what I did. It's unincorporated. So when they have a little sign on there saying you need to wear a mask, I walk right in without a mask, and they can't do anything to me because they're not a corporation, you see. They have to, if that bank is in that particular town limits, that is their town limits, They're operating under unincorporated instead of corporation. So when you go to the city of Aiken, where I live at, outside the city of Aiken, but if you go in the city of Aiken, they can force that because the bank has put themselves under the jurisdiction of the city, under the corporation. And when the bank is actually in a non-incorporated area, it means simply is they cannot enforce that, period. They can recommend to you whatever, but in reality, you don't have to obey them. In reality, you really shouldn't even have to obey them in the city of Aiken, such and such. So this all took place a couple of years ago when I walked into the office of my bank and they were saying, "Who are you?" I'm like, "Who the hell are you?" So they met me at the door. And the attitude was to tell me something. He told me what they were doing immediately because they treated me, I should say, as though I am a slave. And they said, "We'd like to know who you're," and it was a forceful language. "You need to put on your mask." I'm like, "I'm not going to wear the mask," and I walked back out. And then I started studying it for about a day or less, and I realized, no, you can't do this. You can do this in the city of Aiken, but you can't do it in the town of Graniteville. And so ever since then, and I go to the bank, I go to the town of Graniteville. I don't go to the city of Aiken at all. Bank. Just to give you a heads up here in the United States, to understand simply townships, most of them, or communities such and such, they're unincorporated. So they don't have a police force, you see. All right? They don't have a mayor. None of that. So they're dependent on what I call the county in some ways. If there's something happens there, they don't have a police, so they have to call the sheriff. Okay? So I hope that makes you, not makes you, but understand what's going on here. Okay? The only way that a United States District Court, all caps, can have jurisdiction over a sovereign is if the latter volunteers to become a subject of the jurisdiction of, or fails to declare his independence as a sovereign when in a social compact according to the principles of international public order. This corporation has created dozens of agencies, the IRS, the FBI, the DEA, the BATF, to name a few, which employs thousands of agents who receive excellent salaries and benefits for betraying their friends and family. Yeah, they are truly traitors, folks. You know, they think they're really actually doing something good and they're actually harming people. While enforcing the private edicts of a so-called Congress, the men and women of Congress smile, speak softly, and direct their illegal agencies to destroy those who do not fully conform to their wishes, striking fear in the hearts of those who do. Kidnapping and conspiracy are all involved in every arrest and conviction by a federal authority outside of the District of Columbia, and by and through military edicts, executive orders of the commander-in-chief under the law of necessity created by signed deed. The question now leads to whether their duly elected private officials, that is private being all caps, officially swear to oath to uphold the Constitution for the United States of America, or to the republic form of government within which the posterity to the original signatories who created each social compact birthright are protected by service-oriented government, or swear to oath to the Constitution of the United States of America, which means all caps. The profit-oriented corporations. The question is answered by those who study the circumstances of present-day conditions, created by historical facts which reflect the outcome of future benefits of safety, liberty, and pursuit of happiness to all who care for themselves and their posterity as a society of sovereign people of earth who wish to remain such and wish to pass such sovereignty to their posterity to the interests of peace and international public order. It appears by the military social construct actions that most government employees, knowingly or unknowingly, have sworn an oath to the corporate United States. That is in all caps. It is taught to the people by this military social construct that it is our duty as the people who elected them into office to demand accountability from our assumed public officers and to confront them as to where their loyalties lie. It is with the corrupt, treasonous corporation that is in control by foreign agents from within and without, or is it with the reinstitution of the posterity constitutional republic form of government? The United States of America and the Social Compact Party states created thereby in union with her citizens. As an ardent defender of conservative monetary policies, the so-called president, that is Mr. James A. Garfield, urged the resumption of specie payments and the payment of government debts. He said, "Whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolutely master of all industry and commerce." In his inaugural address in 1881, Garfield said. The chief duty of the national governments in connection with the currency of the country is to coin money and declare its value. Grave doubts have been entertained whether Congress is authorized by the Constitution to make any form of paper money legal tender. The present issue of the United States notes has been sustained by the necessity of war, but such paper should depend for its value and currency upon its convenience in use and prompt redemption in coin at the will of the holder, not upon its compulsory circulation. These notes are not money, but promises to pay money. If the holder demands it, the promise should be kept. So the so-called President, Mr. James A. Garfield, was assassinated after only 200 days in office. 80 days after being shot by attorney, ostensibly because he was upset about not receiving an ambassador posting to France. So you had a lawyer who wanted to become an ambassador to France, and he was upset about it, and he decided to take Mr. James A. Garfield's life. In 1909, default loomed once again. The so-called U.S. government asked the Crown of England for an extension of time. This extension was granted for another 20 years on several conditions. One of the conditions was for the United States to permit the creditors to establish a new national bank. This is what happens when you are in debt in a lot of ways, and when you can't pay your debts. They don't have to collect your debts, folks. You're paying the interest on it all the time. The bankers moved deeply into the new military social contract by establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913. And the IRS could collect the interest on them loans made to the United States, all caps. The 17th Amendment, enacted in May 31st, 1913, was the condition for the extension of time, which took away the states' rights to appoint members directly from the legislation to serve in the Senate of the United States, thereby destroying the last vestige of Republican so-called government. Yes, that's correct. Your two senators were appointed, not elected. And people say, that's a great thing. No, it's not. Democracy is always based, as I understand it, as mob rule. So mob rule works like this, guys. It's only 51% to the 49%. So mob rules, those who get the 51% are dictators in a way. And the 49% are left out in the cold. I should say 50.1% instead of, but anyway, you understand. So the United States, all caps, adopted the mercantile system of ancient Babylon. With the passage of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, the United States was firmly latched to the yoke, so that a small number of very rich men have been able to put upon all people a yoke little better than involuntary slavery itself. That yoke inevitably grows heavier with every compounding interest and totals over $20 trillion of debt allegedly owed by all walks of life today. That is $80,000 per man, woman, and child. This vast accumulation of wealth concentrates immense power and despotism, economic domination in the hands of a few central bankers who are able to govern credit and its allotment for this reason, supplying, so to speak, the lifeblood to the entire economic body and grasping it, as it were, in their hands the very soul of the economy, so that no one dare breathe against their will. A worldwide tyranny is gradually being imposed, hidden to most by the money kings. So that's my conclusion tonight. We'll start another time with the First World War. So, so what I'm trying to explain here is the whole idea that you, by what they've done, and it's far more than $20 trillion now, okay? And this money is created out of nothing, too. Your banks do the same thing. The Federal Reserve System does the same thing, too. I explained this also in the book that I shared, The Secrets of the Federal Reserve. This is like the Bible, folks. In my opinion, this is done by Eustace Mullins. Eustace Mullins is probably the most gifted person I've ever seen in my whole life. And the guy suffered most of his life. He was never able to ever marry anyone because he didn't make enough money to even actually do that. He always gave to other people. And Ezra Pound, if you don't know who he is, you need to look him up. He was thrown in a mental institution, by the way, because he opposed the war, World War II. He's a brilliant poet. This is the other book, which is The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is done by G. Edward Griffin. But I find it's much larger. I've read it many years ago, but I find it basically Eustace Mullins does a far better job than what he did. Eustace Mullins went to the Library of Congress because Ezra Pound encouraged him to do that. And he had the privilege for a long time at the Library of Congress to go and read books that are basically maybe one or two copies of this. We don't have that, you see. And Eustace Mullins, in this particular book, does have the bibliography of these books that he read, okay, and the important people that were involved in it. And he also has what I would call who benefited, the banks who bought into shares of this when they eventually did this whole thing, okay? So what happened simply was, you know, and there were people who fought this valiantly, trying to stop it. Like, for example, there's a graph here. It's really small, but it tells you part of what happened. And all the banks pretty much were New York bankers. You know, that New York once was considered, was called New Amsterdam one time. And if you understand and search any history of Amsterdam itself, the money changers were located there. They settled here in the United States and called their place New Amsterdam. And then they realized they better take that down. So they dropped Amsterdam and put York in it. These people have ruled for probably, they've destroyed every civilization in the past. Babylon, Persia, Egyptian, Rome, Greece, all from within, destroying it by what they're doing right now here in the United States, and actually in the whole West. And you do understand, folks, this is it. This is the bottom line. There's no free country to go to, folks. There isn't anymore. You can't go to Australia or New Zealand or wherever, such and such. You can't, because you're not truly free. And eventually, as they continue to wind their pressure on, you won't be able to travel. It's just a year or two away, maybe less than that. And they're pushing it. And the dumbed down public has no idea what's going on, and they don't care. Most of them don't even understand what's going on. So if you care about your fellow man, I would suggest you copy this, what I've shared tonight, and to post it on Facebook or wherever you post it at. Because I don't know of anybody who is doing this at all. I don't know of anyone who's actually reading this, because I want to read it to you, because I want you to get all the points. And you can get this book. You can buy it. I think it's approximately $165. Or you can do it on PDF file, that is PDF download. PDF drive, D-R-I-V-E. You can download the book for free. It doesn't cost you anything. And then you can actually make copies of it if you want to. $150 is a lot of money for a book. But then freedom is, you don't have freedom, folks. I want to explain this one little thing here. If you're not free, you don't have anything. You don't have a life. You don't have anything. If you're not free. And those out there are talking about all this other crap out here. New Age stuff, whatever you want to call it. We can manifest this and manifest that. Yeah, in a free society. But you forget that basically, if you're not free, you are a slave. You see. And most people want to put their heads in the sand. They do not want to do the right thing because they're in fear. They deny their own feelings about this. So I wish you all a happy new year. I hope that it's prosperous for you, but I also, more than anything else, it's time to get educated, folks. It's time to understand that the ball is in your court. You're going to have to pick up the ball for yourself and also for your posterity. And people think I'm being very serious. You better believe I'm being very serious. My background has allowed me to do this because I'm a poli-sci major in college, had an interest in being a lawyer, went to law school. That is, I chose, not law school, but went and visited a couple of times the law library. So this is all case law. I don't want anything to do with this. I also realized simply is that I saw lawyers who were one time, quote unquote, putting someone in jail, and then later on, they're getting them out of jail. So if they were put in jail, they were considered guilty and based upon a trial by jury. Almost that doesn't exist anymore neither. Hardly any trial by juries hardly exists anymore, folks. It's a kangaroo court. And it's bail. And they extract money from people, you see. And so by you accepting the summons, that word is key because that's is a witchcraft type of thing, or summons to summon the dead. Well, you're considered dead with all caps. You are a dead entity to them. You're not a living man or woman. So anyway, I've taken up your time. I appreciate it. And I wish you a good night. You take care. Have a good night. Okay, thank you. See you, Rattifant. I guess Rattifant. Thank you for appreciate what you do. Thank you. Thank you for listening. But the whole key is simply is we must be vigilant and we must tell people the truth, no matter what, because there's no going back, folks. And I'm not talking about any type of military coup or anything like that. When people learn all this and understand it clearly, it means that they veil what has kept them in blindness or kept them in this whole servitude, is their eyes are open and realize the situation. And once that happens, people realize what is going on around them. And they're no longer tricked by government. And then they can teach their kids and other friends about it. And so they can redeem themselves. You see? All right. Have a good night. Take care.